Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July legacy, or not legacies, the lunch stay-at-home lecture. I'm Tim Nutt, director of the UAMS Historical Research Center. Glad you're here today. And I hope everyone is surviving the heat. It's been a little hot and humid lately, so I hope you're all doing well. Today, we're going to be talking about Dr. Augustus Louis Breysacher. I don't know why I had trouble saying that, but one of the founders of UAMS. Before we move into that, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Historical Research Center and the Society for the History of Medicine. So this stay-at-home lecture series is sponsored by the Society, which is the fringe group of the Historical Research Center. Now, the Historical Research Center is the archives division of UAMS, the medical school in Little Rock. It's housed in the library. It's a department of the library. And we are charged with preserving the institutional record of UAMS and also the history of medicine and health sciences throughout Arkansas. So for the institutional records of UAMS, we have departmental reports, yearbooks, of course, photographs, everything like that that would tell the story of how the medical school was founded and everything that has happened since its founding in 1879. And then the history of medicine and health sciences in Arkansas just really encompass anything that has to do with those two areas and how they impacted the state. So the Historical Research Center, as I said, is a department of the library. We are located in the library in the Education 2 building on the UAMS campus in Little Rock. We would love to show you around sometime. So if you'd like to have a tour or visit, or if you need to do research on some aspect of medical history in Arkansas, please feel free to contact us at the email or phone number that is showing up on your screen. Now, the Society, as I mentioned, is the support organization for the Historical Research Center. And in addition to sponsoring programming such as the stay-at-home lecture series, they also support the Historical Research Center in financial ways by helping us purchase books for our History of Medicine book collection, for helping us purchase archival materials that may be found at like estate sales off eBay, things like that. So we're really appreciative of the Society for all the support that they give us. We would love to have you as a member of the Society, and the dues are inexpensive, and I would love to have you check us out and maybe possibly join if you feel that that's appropriate for you. You can go to the URL that's on your screen there. That will take you to the membership page of the Society where you can download a membership form and then mail in your check for dues. And the dues are, as I said, are relatively inexpensive. They're $15 for an individual, $5 for a student, and the student does not have to be here at UAMS. Could be a high school student, a student at any university or college, or anywhere in the US for that matter. If you would like to just skip that step, you can go just directly to paypal.me/shmhp, and that will take you to the dues page as well, where you can pay your dues online. So I hope you'll consider doing that and joining us and supporting the work that we do at the Historical Research Center. As I mentioned, the stay-at-home lecture is sponsored by the Society, and it is held at the first Thursday of every month from noon until 1. And next month, I will be the speaker again next month, and we're going to be celebrating the 125th anniversary of St. Bernard's Hospital in Jonesboro. So I hope you'll join us on August 7th, again at noon, to learn a little bit more about St. Bernard's Hospital and their history of providing medical care to the citizens of Jonesboro in Northeast Arkansas. The link that you use to join the Zoom presentation today, it's shown up on your screen. That is the same link that you will use next month to join the one on St. Bernard's Hospital. And that link is good for any future stay-at-home lecture as well. If you're not on the email distribution list to receive announcements about the stay-at-home lectures and other activities sponsored by the Society and the Historical Research Center, you could use the email address that was on the previous screen to contact the Historical Research Center, and I'll put you on the distribution list so you can be sure to get those announcements and put them on your calendar. So, as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the life and career of Dr. Augustus Louis Breysacher, who is one of the founders of UAMS. And so there's really one of the interesting things about Dr. Breysacher is that he is not as well known as some of the other founding physicians of UAMS. And there's really hasn't been a whole lot of research done into his life and career. So I've done a little digging. I've come up with a little bit of information. So I hope you find it interesting. And if you happen to come across any information about Dr. Breysacher and any research that you guys do, please feel free to shoot that information to us. We'd love to place it in our files if it's something that we haven't heard of before. So to begin, Augustus Louis Breysacher was born in Canton, Ohio, not Iowa, Ohio, on February 2nd, 1831, to George and Elizabeth Keller Breysacher. The parents were German immigrants who had come separately to the United States in the earlier part of the 19th century. His father, George, was a native of Strasbourg, Germany, and had graduated from Heidelberg University. Now, when George Breysacher moved to the United States, I wasn't able to figure out exactly when he immigrated, but when he did settle in Canton, Ohio. Okay, someone said we need captions. Let me turn on the captions right quick. They were supposed to, let's see. I'll continue talking while I'm looking for captions. So while when he settled in Canton, Ohio, he practiced medicine in that city. So that is how his son most likely got interested in medicine himself. Michael, I'm trying to figure out how to do that captions. I don't know if I'm able to figure it out on here. Let me see. No, it's not it. I'll continue looking while I'm moving forward. So the parents, they lived in Canton. They were married in Canton in June of 1828. And they had 3 children. They had Mary Louisa, who was born in 1828, Augustus, who was born in 1831, and then Matilda, born in 1832. And Michael, I'm going to continue looking for how to do those captions. So soon after the birth of their last child, Matilda, in 1832, the family moved from Ohio to St. Louis. It's unclear as to why they chose to move, but there were a number of German immigrants moving into the St. Louis area during this period. In fact, there was a large influx of both German and Irish immigrants into the St. Louis area in the 1830s. So much in fact that the population of the city surged in the 1830s from 6,694 residents to nearly 17,000 by 1840. And Michael, I don't think I'm going to be able to find the captions for today, but there will be captions on the presentation when it's uploaded to YouTube. So I apologize for that. So here's just a map of the area of St. Louis. Of course, you see St. Louis in the map on the map in St. Louis County. This is an 1832 map, and in all, 38,000 Germans settled in the area known as the Missouri Rhineland, an 80-mile stretch that started in St. Louis on the Mississippi River and stretched west to Herman in Gasconade County in Missouri. St. Louis at that time was becoming a fur trading center, and it's also started serving as a gateway for people and goods heading west. And that's why eventually it was known as the Gateway to the West. And of course, the arch was built in commemoration of that. And it was in St. Louis where the future Dr. Breysacher received his general education. Breysacher also took courses in literature and the classics at St. Xavier College in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, St. Xavier College had been founded in 1831 as a men's college in downtown Cincinnati next to St. Xavier's Church. And you'll see on the screen, you'll see St. Xavier's Church on the left. You'll see the college was known as the Athenaeum in the middle. And then you see there's another building to the right, but the school was right in the middle there. In about 1840, the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits, took over the Athenaeum and took over and changed its name to St. Xavier's. So that is where Breysacher was in the late 1830s, 1840s, mid 1840s. Now he is listed in the 1844, 1845 catalog for St. Xavier College. And you'll notice on the screen that he's listed as being from Canton, Ohio. So I'm unclear as to why the family was living in St. Louis at that time. So I'm unsure as to why they would list Canton, Ohio as his hometown, because the family had lived in St. Louis for over a decade at this point. But interestingly enough, after he graduated from St. Xavier College, he went back to Missouri. And in 1859, he graduated from the Missouri Medical College, the octagonal building that you see in the upper left of that photo. Now, the Medical College was originally established in 1840 as the medical department of Kemper College, and became known for being the first medical school established west of the Mississippi River. In 1845, the Missouri Medical College, it became the medical department of the University of Missouri. And it stayed with the University of Missouri for about a decade, and it became an independent agency in 1855, changing its name to the Missouri Medical College. Later in 1899, the Missouri Medical College and the St. Louis Medical College merged, and they went on to form the Medical School of Washington University in 1899. So upon his graduation from the medical college in 1859, Breysacher was certified as a chemist and a pharmacist. He was not certified as a physician at that point. So interestingly, although Breysacher graduated in 1859, and he was living in St. Louis in the 1850 census, he is listed in the Canton, Ohio census as a druggist. So at some point, he must have moved back to Ohio, and I'm assuming he probably had relatives there, but he had apprenticed himself at some point to a pharmacist where he would uh, try to become a druggist. And in fact, he was listed as a druggist at the age of 19 in 1850, Canton, Ohio. Now, after graduation from the Missouri Medical College, Breysacher received an appointment as acting assistant surgeon in the U.S. Army. And from there, he was assigned to Camp Alert in Kansas. Now, at this time, Kansas was on the western border. Um, the camp was originally known as Camp on the Pawnee Fork of the Arkansas River, or Arkansas River, if you're in Kansas. And that had been founded in late 1859 on the Santa Fe Trail to protect a mail station that was being threatened from the Kiowa and Comanche tribes. The camp closed in May of 1860, so it wasn't even really open a year. They started having troops there, stationed there in probably about September 1859. They built a few buildings. But by May of 1860, Camp Alert was closed because the post had been moved 3 miles upstream and renamed. And upon the closure of Camp Alert, Breysacher returned to St. Louis, where he set up his general practice, medical practice in the city. Now, at the onset of the Civil War in 1861, Breysacher was offered a commission in the U.S. Army, which he declined. He ultimately enlisted in a Tennessee unit in the Provincial Army of the Confederate States of America as surgeon, becoming medical inspector in General William J. Hardee's army, where he was present at the Battle of Stones River and the siege of Corinth, Mississippi. He later joined General Benjamin Cheatham's division, which fought in the Atlanta campaign and the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. Now, during the war, it does not seem that Breysacher suffered any injuries during the war, although he was on the fields, and we know that because the Goodspeed's history, which is sometimes you have to take with a grain of salt sometimes, described Dr. Breysacher's service to the Confederate Army as, quote, "He was not an hour absent from duty, which was always on the field as surgeon successively of battery, staff, brigade, and corps." So apparently he had a very successful stint in the Confederate Army. When the Civil War was ended, he found himself first in Greenville, North Carolina, and later in Huntsville, Alabama. And it was in Huntsville where he met his wife, Carolyn, known as Carrie, Drusilla Pinchon, and they were married in January of 1867 in Huntsville. They would go on to have 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. They stayed in Huntsville for a little while, but by 1869, the family had moved to Pine Bluff in Jefferson County, Arkansas, where Breysacher set up a private practice in the city. And that practice grew relatively quickly, having an interest in obstetrics and gynecology. Dr. Breysacher began to specialize in those fields and soon became recognized for his proficiency in the treatment of women's disorders and diseases. He built a beautiful house, as you see on the screen, on 5th Street in Pine Bluff, and they lived there until the family moved to Little Rock around 1874. The house in Pine Bluff changed hands, of course, and it later became the Colonial Steakhouse in Pine Bluff, and it stood standing until the 1980s when it burned and was destroyed. Now, once Breysacher moved to Little Rock, he went into private practice with another doctor, Dr. Philo Hooper, known as Dr. P.O. Hooper, and they went into practice together and had an office at the corner of Main and Markham Streets in downtown Little Rock. And this was particularly advantageous to Dr. Breysacher being in that area because being of German descent and Little Rock having a large German population, that lived in the east end of the city. Dr. Breysacher became very popular with the German residents, and his practice really grew immensely in that, and during that time they had their clinic. Dr. Breysacher, of course, bought a house when they moved to Little Rock, and you'll see it. You can also see that on the screen, and that was located in downtown Little Rock as well, but closer down to where MacArthur Park is. And then later on, um, um, they continued to live in that house until their deaths, both Dr. and Mrs. Breysacher's death. Now the partnership with Dr. Hooper would be advantageous to both of them and to the city of Little Rock and to the state, because the two doctors, would eventually join forces with 6 other doctors to help form the medical school, the first medical school in Arkansas. And these are the 8 men. You can see Dr. Breysacher down there on the lower left, and Dr. Hooper sort of is the second from the right on the top row. So at this time in the late 1870s, the physicians in Little Rock and the city leaders of Little Rock, and really state leaders as well, started discussing the possibility of the creation of a medical school in the state. Those interested in medicine and who wanted to receive formal education had to go out of state to do that, and oftentimes they did not come back to the state when they graduated. And so city leaders and medical leaders really wanted to have a medical school in the state, so the state would not lose the talent when they went to medical school. So they looked at many options, and first they initially thought about having the medical school at St. John's College, which was a Masonic institute located across the sort of east of MacArthur Park. St. John's had been founded in the 1850s. During the Civil War, it had been taken over by the U.S. Army and used as a military hospital. And so they never really, and after that, when it was turned back over to the Masons for educational purposes, the school never really regained its footing. And so when they were looking at St. John's for a potential association with a medical school, the 8 founders that you see on your screen decided that St. John's was not adequate, did not have the proper infrastructure and curriculum that was needed to house the medical school. So they then turned to the University of Arkansas, then known as Arkansas Industrial University. And they came to an agreement with the university where they could use the name of the university in the school, in the medical school's name, but it was not officially connected to the university beyond the name. The university had no authority over the school. It was not part of the university's official structure or hierarchy. And in fact, the medical school was a proprietary school, and any profit that the medical school made was pocketed by the 8 founders. And that remained the situation until 1911, when the school was officially assumed into the University of Arkansas hierarchy. So the 8 doctors, when they finally got approval from the Arkansas Industrial University to use their name, they had to find a building that was appropriate, that could be used for a medical school, and they settled on the Sperandeo Hotel and Restaurant in downtown Little Rock. The building had been built in 1873. It was a three-story building, and so they retrofitted it as best they could to use it for the educational component of the medical school. So the Arkansas Industrial University Department of Medicine started out in the Sparandio Hotel. It was located at Second and Center Street, I believe. Second and Louisiana, sorry. And it cost $5,000 to purchase. So the eight physicians pooled their resources, purchased the building, retrofitted it as best they could for a medical school. And the first session of the medical school began in October of 1879. Now, and just they did this very, very quickly because the discussions really didn't begin until early 1879, and a decision was not made to go with the Arkansas Industrial University name until July of 1879. That's when they got approval from the Board of Trustees of the university. So they had to really move quickly to get the session started in October of 1879. And the clinical work that the students did occurred mainly in the old Phones Brothers warehouse, which was located just on the other side of the alley that you see on the left side of the screen. The warehouse, it's not the one where the public library renovated into its facility. This was an earlier warehouse. But clinical labs and things like that were set up in the Phones Brothers warehouse where they could do clinical work. There was really no hospital to speak of in the city at this time. Now, at the same time that Dr. Breysacher was setting up the university, and when the medical school did get established, he became part of the faculty there, a professor of obstetrics and gynecology, but he also maintained his private practice at the same time. And in the 1870s, there were a lot of sort of distrust of doctors and medical schools, and the Arkansas legislature even tried to pass a bill forbidding medical schools to be in the state, calling them a complete waste of money. In 1876, there was a peculiar incident where someone accused many of the doctors in Little Rock, including Dr. Breysacher and some of the other founders of UAMS, of body snatching, where they would go to cemeteries and steal bodies out of the graves for dissection and things like that. So this was just an article in the newspaper about that. It turned out to be a complete hoax, but there was a lot of people who really believed, and I'm not saying it didn't happen either, taking bodies to do dissections on it for the medical school. Of course, this was way before the medical school. There's 3 years before the medical school. So Dr. Breysacher, as I mentioned, was on the faculty. He did obstetrics and gynecology. These were the two medical schools that he practiced at. Of course, the first one, the Sparandio Restaurant and Hotel. It was medical school was located in that building up to 1890. In 1890, the medical school built another 3-story building just down the street at Second and Sherman, I believe it was, and that it stayed in that building until 1912. So for Dr. Breysacher's career in Little Rock as a doctor and as on the faculty of the medical school, he was spent in these two buildings. Now, also in the 1870s and before Dr. Breysacher became involved with the medical school, He had been appointed on the newly created Board of Health, the State Board of Health, which had been established in 1873 to prevent the spread of yellow fever from Memphis and other cities along the river and getting to Little Rock. So by 1874, Dr. Breysacher was listed as president of the Board of Health. And in this article from 1874, one of the first things they were dealing with, in addition to the yellow fever outbreaks, they were talking about how filthy Little Rock was, the filthy conditions of the city, and what could be done to improve the conditions and presumably the health of its citizens. Now, Dr. Breysacher stayed with the Department of Health until 1883 when he resigned, and he resigned because of lack of financial support from the state. In an article in the newspaper, he was quoted as saying, I believe no good can be accomplished by any Board of Health or any other organization without the necessary funds to carry out the plans for which they were instituted. The late legislature, having failed to acknowledge any necessity for health commissioner, leaves the work to be accomplished solely by the individual efforts of the member, hence this action. So he was on the Board of Health for about a decade. And when he resigned, the Board of Health basically collapsed. It was disbanded soon thereafter, and it wouldn't be until 1913 that another state Board of Health was founded, which occurred right before the 1918 flu pandemic. So it was unfortunate that we disbanded our Board of Health and did not get one until decades later. Now, one of the interesting things about Dr. Breysacher, he was in obstetrics and gynecology. He has the distinction of delivering a famous person from Little Rock who was born in the Tower Building. Now, he was not the doctor to this baby's mother. That the doctor was actually Dr. Edwin Bentley, who was another founder of the medical school. But Dr. Bentley was out of town. And so at the birth of General Douglas MacArthur, Dr. Breysacher helped deliver the future general when his mother went into labor. Dr. Breysacher continued to have his private practice in Little Rock. By 1886, he was in practice by himself, and you see on the screen he was listed as physician and surgeon, and his office was above a drugstore in downtown Little Rock. In 1893, Mrs. Breysacher passes away. She had been ill for a few weeks, and so that really hit Dr. Breysacher hard. And only a few years later, in 1897, he was found dead in his office above the drugstore, caused by a heart attack. He was lauded as being one of the founders of the medical college in articles in the paper, and they described him as a skillful physician and surgeon and a genial, whole-souled gentleman. And they noted that he had been in Little Rock for 25 years. So his death was certainly a shock to the medical community and to the community at large in Little Rock. I think he had built up a pretty strong fan base, not just with his patients, but just with people in general in Little Rock. The funeral was held in Christ Episcopal Church, downtown Little Rock, with burial following in Mount Holly Cemetery. The medical school closed for the funeral, and the student body as a whole went to the funeral to show their respects to Dr. Breysacher. He was survived by his 3 children, but only a couple of years later, in 1899, his only son, A.L. Breysacher, passed away, leaving his 2 daughters to carry on. So as Dr. Breysacher, he is not as well known as some of the other ones. There's a lot more information on Dr. Bentley, for example. But he made tremendous impact to the medical field in Little Rock, and was truly one of the visionaries in seeing the need for a medical school in the state and making that happen. So Dr. Breysacher, truly a good character, great character in Arkansas history and Arkansas medical history. So thank you for that. That's just a little bit about Dr. Breysacher. If there's anyone who has any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature on here. And I am going to try to make my video larger. So let's see. See if that will help. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask me any questions whatsoever. So, and I did forget to mention, although I sort of alluded to it, this is being recorded and it will be placed uploaded to YouTube in a few weeks. And in fact, you can see all of our past stay-at-home lectures on the Society's YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and search for SHMHP, the channel will come up and you can see all the videos that we've done, not just the stay-at-home lectures, but also some other events that have been sponsored by the Society, including a panel discussion about the Little Rock Internal Medicine Clinic and a book signing event about Dr. Joe Bates's book on the history of tuberculosis treatment in Arkansas. So let me see if we have any.
BSHK.
Oh, thank you, Molly, for telling Michael that. I have a question. Did he have a private practice in addition to serving on the medical school faculty? What was his focused course he taught, or do we know? Yes, he did have a private practice, as was many of the other doctors who were on the faculty at the medical school also had a private practice. Interestingly, Dr. Breysacher was one of the few of the founding members that did not go on to become president of the medical school and lead the medical school. He just remained on the faculty for the time while he was in Little Rock and before his death. Michael, I don't understand your comment, but Breysacher, German name? I can hear your audio is on, Michael, if you want to.
Oh, Breysacher. Breysacher?
Breysacher?
Isn't that better than the German has been slaughtered into English?
Well, you know, when I was doing research on Breysacher, I found a listing that was that's not the spelling of Breysacher. I'm assuming it's probably Breysacher, probably, but I'm not positive with that. Getting back to Malin, your question about focused course, he taught, I don't know the specific courses that he taught, but it was all about obstetrics and gynecology. So unfortunately, we don't have the yearbooks from the university when it started in the late 1890s, before he passed away. So I couldn't find a thing in the yearbook for him, but in the catalogs, which we do have, he's listed as the faculty member for obstetrics and gynecology. I just didn't get down all the exact courses that he wrote. And of course, those would be at that time, since the university was a proprietary school at that time, that would have been, students would have purchased lecture tickets. So the faculty members would have been giving lectures on different topics, and then the students would purchase tickets to attend whichever lecture they wanted to listen to. Anyone else have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your support of the stay-at-home lectures. Next month on August 7th, I hope you'll be here. We're going to be talking about as I mentioned, the history of St. Bernard's Hospital in Jonesboro. They're celebrating their 125th anniversary this year.
Oy vey.
So I hope you'll join me for that. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me with my email. That email that you saw, hrc@uams.edu. Or you can contact me directly at tgnutt@uams.edu. Happy to help you in any way. So thank you all for being here. Stay cool. Happy 4th of July, and we will see you next month. Have a good one.